Good afternoon, everybody. Please bear with us for a minute, if you don't mind. We've got over 400 plus people registered for this afternoon. So we're just going to let the registration numbers rise and come in before I start the session this afternoon. So please bear with us and hopefully you understand why we might be silent for a little bit. Thank you. Right, everybody, good afternoon, and we will get going. I always find those pauses a little bit worrying, but you allow it to happen to let the registrations come in. Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to the latest Institute website. As always, I hope everyone is keeping well and remaining safe. It's a pleasure this afternoon to welcome members and non-members both from the UK and overseas. From a UK perspective, it's good at the moment to see that restrictions are lifting. We're able to see family and friends. We're able to take trips to cafes, to pubs, to the hairdressers and to shops. So maybe slowly but surely we return to life and some form of normality. My name, for those of you who haven't come across me hosting one of the Institute's webinars before, is Jonathan Barber. I'm the Institute's Head of Business Development. Let me start by saying that this is a two-part series. We have the first session now, today, and that's followed next Thursday, the 29th, at the same time, 12 p.m. midday, for session 2 of this webinar series. Can I just ask everybody, though, to double check that they have registered for the second session? You do need to register for both sessions. So, for example, at the moment, we have over 440 people registered for this session, but we only have 300 people registered for the second session. Those that haven't registered for the second session, please do so. I'll start with a little bit of housekeeping if I can. As we always say, we hope we don't have any technical issues. If we do, please bear with us and we will look to resolve those as quickly as possible. Ro is laughing there because he knows that my technical ability is not great and I will be relying upon my colleague to resolve any of those.
I work for a tech company, but believe me, I have no technical expertise either, Jono, so we're all right.
Right, so we'll do our best, but please, if we do have any issues, bear with us, we will resolve those. The session is being recorded and we will share a recording with all attendees within the next 24 to 48 hours. Importantly, this session, like any other session, is about your involvement, your engagement. And you can do that through the Q&A facility or the chat box facility, either at the top or the bottom of your screen. Where those facilities are will just depend upon the layout of your screen, your system and setup. Questions, observations, experiences, we would welcome those today. I think we can learn from everybody, and this is probably a subject and a topic more than others where learning and appreciating others' experiences, questions and thoughts is going to be really valuable. Please use the facilities. I don't intend on this first section to just keep jumping in with questions. We may have a break halfway through to take some of the questions. We may leave them all to the end, and then we'll discuss and we'll follow those through. So please, I encourage everybody to engage and to use those two facilities to chat and to ask questions. A funny one really, because ahead of today's webinar, I found myself reflecting upon the range of webinars that the Institute has put on since July last year. We've covered tax and various types of tax. We've covered financial reporting and accounting treatment. We've covered technology in various guises. We've looked at risk. We've looked at marketing. We've looked at practice development. We've looked at insurances, funding, grants, financial distress and insolvency. We've put those on because we appreciate members, accounting and finance professionals crave, if not demand, technical information and technical updates. And we also appreciate that members like to hear from, like to learn about relevant business-related subject matters. But I do feel that today's session and next Thursday's session are vitally, vitally important. And as the screen shows at the moment, these two sessions are about well-being and mental well-being, something that I think as individuals, as organisations, as practitioners, as small and medium-sized businesses, we need to take very seriously. It's fair to say much has changed in the last 12 to 14 months. We've all lived under restrictions that we've never, ever been used to, especially from a UK footing. Life has been far from normal. We've all experienced now working from home on a pretty much consistent basis. Some of us have had to work from home, and some of us have also had to homeschool children of various ages. We've had to juggle work and personal lives. We've not been able to see family and friends, colleagues, and very sadly for some of us, we may and probably have lost loved ones. I think it's also important to acknowledge the role that the accounting profession has played in the last 12 to 14 months. And I don't think this is glib to say, but from a business perspective, I think the accounting profession has been at the business front line. Practitioners or accounting professionals who support micro and smaller clients, and accounting professionals that work within an SME-sized organisation have probably found themselves being rushed off their feet, incredibly busy, and finding they have less and less time to dedicate to themselves. You know, government initiatives have had to be looked at, clients have had to be advised, clients have needed support and guidance on a range of issues, whether it be cash flow forecasting, business survival, government initiative updates and what the schemes mean, how the funding initiatives could be used or utilised. Your time as accounting professionals has been used to the full. And I think the subject of one's mental well-being and how that impacts you and your colleagues, your families and your clients does need addressing. Why is that important? Well, it's important at one level for how we feel and how we think affects the way we cope with the ups and downs of everyday life. If I take a couple of statistics and information figures that I found from the Mind charity website, 1 in 4 people will experience a mental health problem of some kind every year in England alone. 1 in 6 people report experiencing a common mental health problem, for example, anxiety or depression, in any given week. So thinking about ourselves, thinking about how we support others is crucial and vitally important. I think it's fair to say, given the global pandemic, the awareness and the amount of news, in inverted commas, around mental well-being has increased exponentially. I think there are a number of campaigns that have been run and continue to be run that look to raise this subject matter further and hopefully build our awareness and our appreciation of how to deal with this particular subject matter. But as an institute, we're very fortunate this afternoon to be able to draw upon an expert. And it's with great pleasure that I welcome and I introduce Rohan Kalicharan. Rohan is an award-winning mental health campaigner and speaker. He has advised a number of companies on their wellbeing strategy, as well as being involved in a number of national campaigns to raise awareness around mental health. He has worked with, for example, the Football Association, Heads Together, and Kensington Palace, amongst others, and was in 2020 named as a role model on the Inside Out leaderboard, celebrating workplace leaders who are open about their experience of mental ill health. He has openly shared his journey from severe mental illness and homelessness to advocacy, championing the significance of the vulnerability in breaking down barriers around mental well-being. Away from work, he's an HR director and mental health campaigner, happily married to Claire, and has run over 36 marathons, I think to raise awareness of mental health as an issue, but also as part of his journey. When we spoke to Rohan, he was very keen that we ran 2 sessions. The first session, we will not be using slides today. Today is about Ro providing you with an insight and an understanding of his story. He will explain why he believes giving you his story is so important, because that then leads into next week's session, which will have a practical focus where he will share tools, he will share ideas and thoughts about how to start a conversation. And he will also look at how we can overcome the stigma that is sometimes regrettably linked to mental well-being in the workplace and in society in general. Enough from me, but I just wanted to sort of give a bit of a setting around today's talk and subject. Ro, it's a delight to see you, and we are very grateful for you joining us today. As I say, enough from me. I'll hand over to you, and I and the audience look forward to hearing your story. Thank you.
Jono, thank you, and thank you everyone for joining. It's an absolute privilege to join you today. As Jono said, my name's Rohan Kalicharan, known only as Ro unless I'm in a lot of trouble. So I only really get the full name from my mother these days when I'm in trouble with her. I'm an HR director for a high-tech or a high-growth tech company based in London. And as Jono said, away from that, I am a mental health campaigner and advocate, and it's something that I'm particularly passionate about. And during this first session today, I'd love to share with you some of my own experiences, why I'm so passionate about it, my story to get to where I am now, and perhaps just touch on you know, where we are in the landscape around mental health and mental well-being at this particular point in time. And hopefully that will lead us into next week's session, where we can discuss practical tools on how we can manage our own well-being and help to support the people around us, which for you will mean yourselves, your families, your clients, friends. You know, Jono mentioned the 1 in 4 statistic, which is something that it does get quoted on a regular basis, and it's true. 1 in 4 people will experience a mental illness or mental ill health at any given stage this year. I'd love to do this if we were in a room, but imagine that all 200 odd of us were in a room now. I just ask you to look around and just take in the magnitude of what that means. 1 in 4 of you will experience a mental health challenge this year. But then think about your families who are impacted by it. Think about your employers who are impacted by it. Think about your friends who are impacted by you being one of those 1 in 4. And it becomes very, very apparent very early that we're not talking about 1 in 4. We're talking about 1 in 1. Every single one of us will, at some point in our lives, whether it's through our own experiences or through living through the pain of someone else, every one of us will be impacted by mental ill health at some point in our lives. And today, what I'd love to do, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story, but I'm also going to help, hopefully, to reframe some of the language so we can make the disambiguate the line between mental ill health and mental well-being, because I think it's so important that we actually understand the language and actually remove some of the barriers to speaking, remove some of the fear around speaking. Let me get the difficult bit out of the way first, because again, if we were in person, I'd expect to be heckled at this particular point. Were it not for my mental ill health, I would most likely be a management accountant. Yeah, all right, you can boo me, you can say what you want. I myself was actually a SEMA pass finalist a long, long time ago now. I'm 46 years old now, and I was around 26 when I took my final SEMA exams, but I was also in a place of significantly poor mental health at that point. And I'll go back way beyond that and tell you the story, but that's why I'm not a management accountant these days. But actually, hopefully you'll see that. Why am I qualified to speak to you here today? Well, actually, I have lived through mental ill health. I've been very blessed and fortunate to be part of a number of campaigns around mental well-being in recent years as an ambassador for Mind the Mental Health charity and others. And as I said, as someone who's worked within the finance sphere, I have that understanding of what you do and some of the challenges that you face. And actually, my most recent job before now, I was actually working for a tech company whose role was to actually automate parts of the bookkeeping process for a number of small to medium-sized businesses, small to medium-sized practices. I'm not going to name that company by name because it would be inappropriate to do so. But you know, from that perspective, again, I understand what we were trying to do in that role, which was actually to alleviate so many of the mental challenges that you guys face in your roles. Because I know full well that as independent financial accountants, so many of you are working long hours. You are putting clients at the forefront, and actually, especially in this time that we've been through with the pandemic, how do you create the boundaries between your work life, which is so time consuming, and that small time that you have away from it to spend with families, friends, and actually get the rest that you so need. But that's something, again, that we'll speak about partly today, but mainly next week. So look, let me take you back nearly 30 years. When I first started talking about mental health publicly, I was able to say, let me take you back 20 years, and sadly, time waits for no one. So let me take you back nearly 30 years to my late teens. And that was when we first started perhaps seeing signs that things weren't all that they should be. I've been a very happy person growing up. I had a happy childhood, a fairly privileged childhood. I had a great education. My father was an international sportsman who played cricket for the West Indies. So whilst we didn't grow up with money, cricket was definitely not a money-making machine back then. And believe me, Dad's accountant had to do a hell of a lot to make all the books balance every year for us. But I had a happy and what I describe as privileged upbringing, and I was doing well at school. I was happy. I was an only child, but I always had friends. I wasn't lonely per se, and I was in a great place. And it was probably around the age of 17, which I think in modern parlance is year 12, something along those lines, when I began to notice that the happy-go-lucky, or certainly fairly carefree individual had been replaced by someone who had the weight of the world on his shoulders a lot of the time. Someone who could quite easily fly off the handle, which was something that I'd never really done before. Someone who wasn't quite so confident in his surroundings as well, but someone who was more withdrawn from his friendship groups than he'd been. And I couldn't understand why any of this was happening, but I put it down to, well, you're probably going through another spurt of late puberty or something along those lines. And not long after that, something happened which brought it into perspective. And it sounds flippant now, but I was at home the one night. My parents were going through a divorce at this point, which obviously created a pressure of its own. And around that time, I was at home one night on my own, and literally, I feel like I blacked out. I can't actually remember what happened. But when I came to, all I could see was these 3 remote controls. And again, it might sound flippant, but 3 remote controls just smashed to pieces. Now, even with the lightweight remote controls that we have these days, that's quite difficult to do. But a bit like mobile phones, remote controls in those days, they were bricks. And I just come like, well, what on earth have you done? I remember, when my mum got home trying to explain myself, it was kind of like, I don't know what happened here. I think I tried to make some kind of excuse. I'd never had a driving license. Otherwise, I would have said that I took them outside and drove over them in the back garden. Not that that would have been very explainable anyway, but I just remember I didn't know where that rage had come from. And what I did over the months ahead, and I was still year 12 and going into year 13 at this point, I did speak to people. I asked for help. I spoke to teachers, and they said, you know what, you're fine. You've got a good education, good family. You're going to be going off to university. Don't worry about it. It's just growing pains. I spoke to our family GP. He was kind of like, look, don't worry. Everyone goes through this. You're a young man. You've got a complex stuff going on at home, but don't worry. Everything's going to be just fine. So don't worry about it. So, I believe them, because you believe the people who you trust. You believe the people who are in authority. And I've known my teachers and my GP, since I was young. So I just actually thought, okay, fine, it will pass. And it didn't pass. So I went off to uni, aged 18. And that's where I was going to be studying accountancy and French. Apart from the fact that I did the quite magnificent feat over the next 3 years of actually dropping out of first year 3 times. And actually, I say that non-flippantly, because actually these days you wouldn't be able to. the financial restrictions, etc. But back in those days, okay, fine, here's another student grant, you know, just keep on going until we realise that you can't pay anything back, that type thing. But I wasn't getting any better. And actually, you know, my feelings of confusion and anger were getting worse. And again, I went to a doctor down in Southampton, where I went to uni. And again, he said, "Look, you've just left home for the first time. You're adjusting to a new kind of life. Don't worry about it. You're fine. But just in case you need them, here are some tablets." And the tablets are significant. We'll get to that in a second. But here's the reality. I'd asked for help 3 or 4 times and nothing was forthcoming. And you basically then, my life was continuing to unravel around me. I was confused, I was scared. And eventually, when all these people keep on saying, well, no, you know, there's nothing wrong, you believe them. There's nothing wrong. So it had to be me. It must have been me. So I started looking in the mirror and absolutely detesting the person that I saw. And it got to the point, you know, I was about 19, 20 years old by this stage, and I began to self-harm. And it wasn't self-harm in the way that people talk about in terms of, you know, there are stereotypes that we listen to around self-harm, but self-harm comes in very different ways, shapes and forms. In my case, I actually beat myself up. I broke my ribs, I broke my jawbone. I so hated the person that I woke up to every day. I couldn't study. And I was beginning to have these episodes where I was never, and let me, I suppose, qualify this. I was never someone who woke up in the morning and I needed a drink, but I started just basically going on benders. And, you know, I'd go to the student union bar at about midday, and I'd then go home at about 2, 3 in the morning. And I'd do this for days on end, and I wouldn't be able to sleep. I literally could go 2, 3 days without sleeping. And then I'd just go and hide in my room for a few days and feel like I couldn't face the world. So to the outside looking in, this looked like someone who had just become totally irresponsible and someone who couldn't live with the consequences of his reckless behavior. I remember once, I genuinely, this is no lie, I managed to spend a student loan of £1,100, which, believe me, in 1993 was quite impressive, in about 4 hours. And what does this mean? I'm essentially, I've left home, I've gone to uni, I'm failing miserably at uni. The sport that I played has gone by the wayside. I'm getting into huge debt. I'm not able to really build any relationships because my behavior is so erratic. And actually, I would almost, you know, with a student loan, becoming like rent-a-friend. And I'm looking in the mirror every day and hating the person that I see. And this was, you know, this was a cycle. I think at first, I'd go through these cycles where I would be on a manic and then come down, but it was always quite gentle. Whereas as I got older, as the years went on, the erraticness would be like that. And I didn't know it at the time, but I was living with I was living with bipolar disorder, and I was living with what they call rapid cycling bipolar disorder, which is something which really is highly dangerous. And bipolar has the highest mortality rate of any of the more significant mental illnesses that we speak about. So I did fail first year 3 times. I went back home to Birmingham. Whether I sound like a brummie these days, I don't know, but Birmingham's where I first met Jono. And Jono plays a significant part in my story, which I'll tell you about. But basically, this this whole cycle of chaos went on for another 7 to 8 years, and it was just getting worse and worse and worse. And we got to a point in 2003, age 29, where actually I really, really was so scared. I didn't know what was going on. And again, for the third time, I was given antidepressants. Now, again, back then, we didn't know what we know about mental illness now. I knew nothing about bipolar. And actually, every time I went to the doctor, I'd just be complaining about a low mood. I wouldn't be talking about my high moods. But actually, what was happening at that point is they were giving me someone who was particularly dangerous to himself when he was in an elevated mood state. They were giving me antidepressants, which was going to elevate that mood even further, meaning that actually I was going to become an even bigger danger to myself. And I did get to the point where actually all those years of self-hatred just kind of like manifested in worthlessness. We talk about the stigma of suicide. We talk about suicide as a selfish act. Guys, it's nothing of the sort in a lot of cases, not where mental illness is involved. Because you get to the stage, number one, it's called mental illness for a reason. So actually, you're not in a fit state to really process your thoughts and make rational decisions anyway. But then you add to that, it's the pain that you're causing to those around you. My parents and my friends and family had seen me go from this promising young man to someone who was just a wreck, someone who was constantly, unhappy, someone who hated himself, someone who was in thousands of pounds of debt, someone who'd failed in his exams, someone who couldn't hold down a job. I couldn't hold down a job because, quite simply, if I was in manic, I couldn't go to work because my energy level was just all over the place and I couldn't concentrate. And actually, when I was in depressive mode, I couldn't face anyone. So literally, I was able to perhaps go to work 2 weeks out of 4, but I still couldn't understand what was wrong. And in the end, it got to the point where I couldn't sustain it anymore. And age 29, I did attempt to take my life for the first time. And it was a cry for help. That one was a cry for help. I didn't want to die, but it was a cry for help. And that help never came, because I remember the NHS, even back in those days, was just overwhelmed and overrun. And, I remember the next day I was, they called me into the crisis unit and they said, well, look, you're not going to do this again, are you? I said, no, don't worry, I'm not going to do it again. And they said, great, well, you can go now. What they didn't know is I had nowhere to go. I had at different points been homeless on my journey. And actually the fact that we had such stigma around mental illness at that point, my housemates certainly didn't want anything to do with me. So I had nowhere to go. And again, there was just this cycle over this next few years of worthlessness, self-hatred, of perceived failure, of debt, of unhappiness. There were, of course, chinks of light during that, but the overwhelming, it was just a life of unbridled chaos. And we got to January of 2006, 15 years ago now, which is when I did make a third attempt on my life. And that was the one I meant. I really didn't want to live. And I don't know to this day why one of my best friends decided at 3 a.m. on Saturday morning to walk past my house because she was worried about me. But she was the one who found me and alerted the ambulance. And as I said, actually, in the documentary for which I won an award with Channel 5 back in 16, had the ambulance arrived 2 minutes later, I wouldn't be here today. And I don't know why the next day I woke up. Well, I don't know why I woke up, but I don't know what had changed, but something did change. I woke up that morning and I actually did want to live. I was confused. I still full of self-hatred and confusion, but I finally put my hand up. Everyone had known that I was in trouble for about 15 years, but I did put my hand up and said, I need help. Please, please help me. And I said that to my mum. I said that to my best friend. And in that moment, I made that commitment that whatever needed to be done to turn my life around, I would go on that journey. And at that point in time, I was referred to a counsellor through my mum's employee assistance program. And I'm always very grateful for it. And he actually referred me to Mind the Mental Health charity. And some 4 months later, after 15 years of chaos, I walked into the room of a specialist who told me that I'd been living with bipolar disorder. And it's very rare that you are living with such a serious illness and someone tells you that, and you actually want to jump for joy. You really, really do. Because actually in that moment, the chains that had held me in darkness for so long were actually released. From the next day, and this sounds dramatic, but it's not, I was able to look in the mirror with compassion instead of hatred. For 15 years, I'd looked at myself in the mirror and hated everything about the person I saw. From that next day, I looked at that person and saw someone who I had great compassion and love for, someone who somehow had overcome 15 years not knowing they were living with this illness. And actually the mindset was, I couldn't ever live with being someone that I hated, but I could live with someone who was being ill, and I was going to overcome that illness. And it's been, it was the start of a long journey. When I first got that diagnosis, I was able to go into full-time therapy for a short period of time to actually unpack a lot of the pain of that 15 years. And during that particular point in time, I can only equate it to being like a baby in a man's body, because the only life I'd known had been chaos and illness. And there I was trying to unpack how to live a normal life without chaos, a life which was that of actually going to work, eating normally, sleeping normally, maintaining normal relationships with myself and with others. I'd not been able to hold down work in a long, long time. And I saw a job advertised for a company called ABPM Financial Recruitment, for whom a certain Jonathan Barber was a managing director at that time. ABPM, I didn't have a CV really to fall back on at that time, but ABPM gave me an opportunity to just rebuild. And I was only with ABPM for 12 months, but John, you'll never know the thanks that I have for you guys, because it was during those 12 months that I was able to go through therapy and actually, just for the first time in my adult life, live something which just equated to an element of normality. I learned how to function on my own 2 feet with the love of my family and friends around me. And it was during that time that I was able to look in the mirror and realize that I was making progress for the first time in my adult life. And that was hugely encouraging for me. Over the next 3-4 years, I still stayed fairly quiet actually about my mental illness. It wasn't something that I spoke about. I was rebuilding my life. I was making new friends. I was just feeling an element of being settled after the chaos. And yet I knew something was probably missing. And I remember I was sat listening to a talk about mental health in 2010, and listening to it, I just realized that I really needed actually to share my own experiences with others to actually help them on their journeys. But actually it's ended up helping me more than anyone else. And that's how I became an ambassador for Mind, and how I became a mental health campaigner. We have all these phrases these days about being vulnerable, about being your full self. And actually, by not telling anyone about my mental illness, I was denying my full self. I was sat there, I was making small baby steps forward in my life, but I was still denying my full self. And when I finally was open to the world, I remember I just wrote a blog post and a Twitter post to say, by the way, guys, I've been living with mental illness for a very long time. And I apologized to a few friends who I'd really let down during my time of mental illness. And I was so scared of what the response would be. But actually the response was just, why are you apologizing? Why didn't you tell us sooner? I was kind of like, well, actually, I didn't know. I didn't know I was ill. I've been lucky. There was one friendship in particular which had been wrecked by, what had been going on when I'd be in manic phases. And that person, we were able to catch up again after a long time, and I'm blessed to say he was an usher at my wedding a couple of years ago, and we've rebuilt that friendship. As I said, over these last few years, I've been able to become a significant mental health campaigner, and I'm very proud to have been able to be involved in some great campaigns, work with some great companies to make a difference. Actually, what I really enjoy more than anything is when I get to work in schools on a one-to-one basis with young men in particular. When I get to work with ethnic communities for whom the stigma is still so much stronger within so many Black and Southeast Asian communities. And when I also get to go into prisons and work with young offenders around their mental well-being, and it's been a hugely rewarding chapter in my life. So look, that's my story, and I hope that it will give you a semblance that, and not every story has to be this death to life story. You know what? Mental illness is not just about serious mental illness. Actually, mental well-being is about how we feed and nourish our well-being, and I think that's so important that we address that. And it's something that I spoke about earlier. We talk about mental health. We talk about 1 in 4 people living with a mental illness. And we talk about all these illnesses like, schizophrenia, bipolar. Obviously, we talk about depression, anxiety, and the like. And mental illness it's very frightening. When we frame in those languages, we do scare people from talking about mental illness. What I actually really want to encourage you all to do is think about mental well-being. If you look back to a few months ago to the 1st of January, we'll have woken up and so many people will have had New Year's resolutions. Some of them would have wanted to save so they can put more money for you to count for them. But some people would have wanted to work on their fitness. Some people would have said, right, I'm not drinking alcohol. Some people would have been on healthy eating kicks. So many people would have been doing things for their physical wellness because that's what they're told they should be doing. And actually, I want to talk about our fruit and veg from mental wellness. Okay, let's just think about our mental well-being, and actually think about, in the same way that you might do something, you might eat healthy, you might try and sleep, and so, all the things you do for your physical well-being. Think about what are the things that you can do that serve your mental well-being. So for some of you, that might be going for a run. For some, that might be cooking. For some, it might be reading, music, time with friends. It's going to look like something different for all of you. But actually, what you're trying to do with all of that is find that one thing which allows you to live in the present moment. You know what, guys? We spend so much time living in yesterday and living in tomorrow. You'll get home tonight and you'll be worried about what happened today and what you didn't do tomorrow, or what you didn't do today. And then you'll start worrying about tomorrow. And it's robbing you of the joy of today, and it's robbing you of the sleep that we need to be mentally well. Whatever you do, even if it's just for half an hour every day, find something which allows you to live in the present moment. I do it with running and cycling. When I'm running and cycling, I'm living in the moment, and I'm mindful of that moment, and I'm not worrying about what happened today, and I'm not capable of worrying. I'm too worried about how I breathe in the present. But for me, that's what allows me to step out of the worries of today, the worries of yesterday, the worries of tomorrow. It allows me to be present in the moment. And it's so important that you do that to clear your head. And again, it's about creating boundaries between, especially now in the pandemic. I know that some of us are slowly making our way back into the office. But again, how do you create boundaries between work and non-work? And these are some of the things that we'll talk about next week, practically, to give you some help. We'll talk through some practical tools around how we create those boundaries, how we maintain a healthy work-life balance, how we maintain our relationships. Before we go to questions, just really a couple of things to leave you with. Some of the misconceptions that we talk about. We're told that mental health equals weakness. We're told that we must be able to control our feelings. We're told that talking about it won't help. We're told that it will make us a burden to others. And we're told that actually, especially this for men, and obviously I do a lot of work around men, but it relates to women as well. But we're told that, real men won't ask for help. You don't need to. These misconceptions are killing us. They are literally killing us, and we need to step away from them. And all I'd say is, it's not weak to have a mental health challenge. You don't have to always be in control of your feelings, because that's when you can speak to those around you. And actually talking about it does help. It will not make you a burden to the people who love you and care about you. And actually, you really are a real person when you reach out to others, because actually the strongest people are those who put their hands up and ask for help. So look, that's enough from me for session one. As I said, I really hope that it will lay the foundation for a great session next week. But please, over to you for any questions.
Well, Ro, thank you so much for that. I think to listen to somebody for 40 minutes, being incredibly open, sharing a story like you've shared, and in a way, I hope my wording is correct, actually demonstrating that by showing your vulnerability is actually a strength, not a weakness.
Absolutely.
I think there's a lot for all of us taken away from the last 40 plus minutes. I think it's also worth emphasizing, and I don't believe I'm taking words out of your mouth, but one of the reasons that you wanted to start with the story today was so that you were building rapport, trust with the audience and the attendees, so that when they come back next Thursday and they're listening to you, they're actually listening to somebody that they feel maybe they've got to know something about from today's session, and therefore whatever it is you share with us next week, being careful with words, they're buying into because of what you've been open and what you've shared today. So thank you for that. A couple of questions sort of right away, and I know we're going back a number of years now, but you talked about, I think you were talking about age 17, year 12 in current education terms, but you'd asked for help and nothing was forthcoming. Things have moved on, you know, you've gone from 17 to the age you are now. But is there any thoughts or advice you would give if somebody is trying to ask for help, but maybe they're not getting the response that they are hoping for? Is there anything they could do that would help them?
Mate, it's an absolutely brilliant question. And look, actually, that won't have changed over the years. It's just that we hope now that actually people will listen better because we have better knowledge and so much of the stigma is gone. But if you are asking for help and you aren't getting the help that you need, my honest advice is trust your instinct. If you sincerely know that something's not right, or you're concerned that something's not right, keep on asking. And perhaps ask the same person or ask someone else. And you know what, these days, actually, there are different resources. You know, you've got obviously still the doctors in the NHS who are absolutely brilliant, and I wouldn't be alive without them. But you know, you have also got the mental health charities, the Mind Info Line, Rethink's Info Line, Mental Health Foundation, and so on and so forth. You know, that's a great starting point. Also, though, friends, family, you know, they're the ones who really care, and often they can see that you're struggling. And actually, you know, sometimes it's just a case of you don't have to go into the conversation saying, by the way, I've got a mental illness. Because you don't know that. I mean, you just go and say, you know what, I'm feeling really tired. My moods are low. I can't sleep. I've got no energy. I'm being overwhelmed. And it may well be that those are huge symptoms of a mental illness, but it could just be that you're having a difficult time, and just offloading to that friend and having that conversation will make such a difference. So look, my advice is keep on asking until someone listens.
Yeah, okay, that's great. And in a way, I think that there's a similar question from somebody about, you know, they've approached their GP with their concerns, but maybe they're not getting the right advice or help. I think what you're saying is stick with your instinct. Keep pushing.
Please do. Don't be fobbed off. Please speak to one of the helplines. The Mind Info line is great on mind.org.uk. And they will, the info line number's there, and they will try and redirect you. There are, look, don't get me wrong, there are waiting lists. It's not ideal. We haven't got all the resources that we'd like to have, but you know, if you can't get an appointment with someone straight away, again, please, if you can, you know, speak to a friend, a family member. And as I said, it doesn't have to be that heavy conversation. It can just be, you know what, I'm just not feeling great right now. This is what I'm going through. You know, what can we do? But the other thing, again, try and find just those few moments every day when you can just find that thing that takes you to your happy place, where you can live in the moment.
Okay, no, thank you for that. I think this is a follow on from my question. And thank you for the question here. My son has just become a teenager and is very insular and hard to gauge, and I worry about his mental health. He won't open up. So, what would you suggest I look out for, and any suggestions to get him to open up?
Great question. Look, I'm a deep introvert myself. I love time on my own. Whereas my wife's an extrovert, she always wants to be around people. So believe me, I found lockdown a lot easier than others. I think, look, I think you're absolutely right. You want to make sure that your son has that healthy balance. So even if they are a fairly insular person, of having those outside interests, that they're not just stuck indoors the whole time. Look, the impact of lockdown on young people has been just tragic, really. And for your son having been locked indoors, basically away from any friendship groups that he may or may not have, I can't begin to empathise with how much that will have challenged him. I think all you can do is try and make family time, try and make time for you and him to, try and engage in some of his interests, whatever they may be, whether it be reading, video games. And I mean, I'm not particularly good at video games, but, or try and get him outdoors, whether it's for a walk, run, cycle. Cycling is something that typically parents and kids can do together. I know this all sounds like really simple stuff, but just try and engage on a level with him, to that point where you've got that trusted relationship where he feels he can speak to you. Actually, this is not just about an introversion and being locked away, but it's actually about, I'm feeling really down about things at the moment. And actually, the other thing is, just ask the question: how can I support you, Sam?
Brilliant. Thanks, Ro. Thanks, Ro, for sharing with us your experience. So happy that you overcame all this. What may be the signs of closely coming to a total breakdown?
Yeah.
Question.
Yeah.
What level should someone look for help from health practitioners?
Again, great question. Look, there are so many signs, and this is some of what we'll talk about next week. But let me just touch on it. I think, if you, these are signs you look for in yourself or in others, and it may be someone who's not sleeping well, someone who's moodier than usual, someone who might usually normally be on time but is late. Sometimes someone who's kind of like typically very smartly dressed but is just looking really quite disheveled. Someone who as perhaps they're not eating properly. They may have put on or lost weight. These are just some of the small simple signs to look for, but actually nearly every single person going through a mental illness will probably experience one of those. And that's when you just try and engage as a friend. You just ask that question, or well, actually, even if it's yourself, engage as a friend with yourself to ask the question, actually, do I need help here? And actually, look, I think, yes, the NHS is overwhelmed, but I think more than ever, we understand the impact of mental well-being, and I think every GP now will want to speak to you and try and guide you honestly if you really actually feel that there is a problem, that this has gone beyond feelings of beyond kind of like just having a blip to actually, going through a really, really awful time.
No, okay, thank you. Ro, what do you say to someone who has mental health issues, but they say to you, I am fine? You are the one with the problems.
Oh, yeah. You mean how would you have spoken to me for
Yeah,
10
well,
years? Is
yeah,
basically what you say.
yeah,
You have to be resilient. Um, you have to be resilient, and resilience comes in different forms. I do a lot of speaking about resilience, and sometimes it's climbing over the wall, sometimes it's running through the wall, sometimes it's stepping away from the wall altogether. And sometimes it is about stepping away and actually letting someone else have the conversation with that person, um, and hope that actually if they hear it from a different mouth, they might suddenly think, oh, wow, this is more, more than one person saying this. But again, I think it's persevering and just being a friend, just saying, look, we can tell that you're not happy. We can tell that, certain things aren't as they normally are. How can we support you? And sometimes it doesn't have to be framed as, mental ill health. It just has to be framed as, right, we can tell you're struggling. How can I help you? How can I be a friend here?
yeah.
But I think just persistence and resilience.
Thank you. I see this as quite a wide, not quite sure how this is answered, but how to balance work stroke life.
And this is one we'll definitely talk about next week. But all I'd say is, look, I think we absolutely need to take ownership and accountability for making sure we've got that boundary in place. Whatever that boundary looks like. I'm back at the office now, 2-3 days a week. But even when I'm working from home, I ensure I've got the fake commute. So every morning I pop out for a run, bike ride, walk, and every evening I do the same. Something which separates my work and the rest of my life. And actually, look, it's not that simple, because we'd be naive to think that you can just separate the two. Our lives are holistic and they're interlinked, but we do need to ensure that we create boundaries between the two.
Yeah, thank you. I think some reflections, if I could, from the audience, Ro. Thank you for sharing your story. I have been affected by mental health issues, both as someone who has suffered from extreme stress and someone who had, or sorry, have family and friends who have suffered. So thank you for your story. Then thank you for this. I find that my accountancy work affords me the opportunity of burying myself in numbers and avoiding feelings, thereby not dealing with them properly. I suspect that this may be a common trait of accountants. I have found that putting the work down at intervals and asking myself, how do I feel, and sharing how I feel with others has been critical in maintaining balance and reasonable serenity.
Great role modeling.
This I learned from my 12-step program. I am also a recovering alcoholic with 25 years over continuous sobriety. Any comment, Ro?
Just kudos to you, for being so honest, for being so vulnerable, for understanding the challenges that you've overcome, and for actually having a process in place that works for you. As I said earlier, we're all individual. Different things are going to work for us, but you've been able to identify what works for you, and you're bravely able to put that against the demons of yesterday. Well done.
Yeah, no, okay. Thank you for well, thank you for the reflection, and then thank you for your thoughts. Thank you to the individual who's also shared that their wife committed suicide last year, but it was the necessity to service their clients that helped pull them through. So, thank you for sharing that with us. Because that's also interesting to hear that your work has played out.
Number one, I'm so sorry that you've experienced that. And why do I do what I do? I do it so that less and less people will have to process the emotions that you will have no doubt had to process. And all I'd encourage you is, please don't lose yourself entirely in your work. I think just if, you'll know when the time's right for you, but there will come a time where you will need to process that grief. And there will be help from mental health and grief charities to help you on that journey. But just my thoughts really and prayers with you.
Thank you. We have, I think, slightly covered this one, but I don't want to ignore a further question. Thanks firstly to you, Ro. How would you go about persuading your loved one to seek professional help?
I think it depends on where they are on the journey, and it depends on how strong your conversations have been with them so far. If they've acknowledged, first and foremost, they need to acknowledge that there is a problem, and that, I think that's when you can encourage them. If you can just again, engage as a friend, as a family member, to say, look, I know that this is impacting you, and I'm always going to be there for you, but I can't fix you. And actually, that's when you can encourage them to go on their own journey of discovery and find the right resource to help them. But I think first and foremost, actually, the conversation is just at some point finding a way for them to look at you and say, yeah, actually, you know what, I know that that I'm not right now, and actually I really benefit from help. And that's when you can signpost them in the right direction. Don't bombard them, but I think also just sometimes just look, by the way, these are guys that can help you. So just turn up to a conversation one day and say, have you thought about speaking to Mind? Have you thought about talking to your doctor? Or, by the way, I read this on a website. Whatever you can do to engage in that conversation.
Yeah. Okay. No, thank you for that. It's easy for me to say thank you, Ro, as we probably sort of start to draw the session to an end. But I think it's more powerful if I may, if I share some of the thanks and the comments from the attendees. So, thank you so much for sharing this, Ro. It's a very powerful and moving story. This has been very insightful, changing my perspectives and mindset. So that's great to hear. Thank you, Ro. Sorry to hear about your story, but this has made you a great person. I've also got, thank you, such a refreshing talk on this challenging matter. I look forward to next week, part 2, and a very inspirational session. Many thanks. That's
you.
a powerful piece, Ro. I, on behalf of the Institute, can and should quite rightly thank you for giving up your time, for opening yourself up and sharing your personal story and journey with our members and with non-members. But what probably the last 5-6 people have just said is the thanks that really matters.
It's a pleasure and privilege, and I'm really looking forward to joining you next week. And all I'd really leave you with, and I think a natural segue from, and thank you for the comment around the person that it's helped me to be, that I've become through it. And I think I'm going to use the accounting terminology here. If I think of where I am on a given day, as whether it's my P&L or my balance sheet, the reality is every experience that I've been through in life, whether negative or positive, it's a debit or credit on my personal ledger. And the reality is, it's every one of those experiences, I'm the sum of those experiences. And actually, some of them, are really difficult, but we grow through them, and I learn through them. And the mental illness has made me stronger. It's made me more resilient. It's made me more compassionate. So I wouldn't actually change a thing. I wouldn't change a thing. Those entries onto my ledger are what make me who I am today. Yeah. And I think for me, I'm always really, really honest about that. I wouldn't change anything.
Yeah. Look, thank you. There are other comments there that are coming through, and I really appreciate attendees making those.
John, all I'd say is, look, if I'll let you think of what works best for anyone to send any questions through that you can forward to me.
Okay. Look, thank you. Just a reminder as we draw the first part of the session to the end. If you haven't registered for next week's session, please go and register now. Let's do it now so you know it's done. The email will arrive with your registration login details for next Thursday, the 29th, 12 p.m. midday, same start time. Thank you everybody for joining us this afternoon. Thank you for the very warm and welcome comments and feedback for our guest speaker today. For the rest of your day, for the rest of the week, until we see each other again next week, stay safe, remain well. Ro, thank you very much indeed, and look forward very much to next Thursday. Thanks all, and have a good afternoon. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.